Hello, and welcome to Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga, and each week we invite you to send in your questions, and we'll explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga together. Thank you, Rajiv, for your question. And the little cemetery that you're talking about, Dairy Road, just a little bit to the west of 10th Line on the south side of Dairy Road, is known as Kindry Cemetery. Some refer to it as Kindry Pioneer Cemetery. And it is indeed a very, very old cemetery with maybe a unique part of its history. It's a cemetery that's been lost twice, but let me get there in a little bit of the story. So the cemetery was established as believed to be originally a family cemetery for the children of Nathan and Mary Kindry, and it was established in and around 1829. So it is truly an old cemetery within the modern city of Mississauga. The Kindry family themselves had originated from Wales before first arriving in the United States and then settling in New Jersey. It's believed that Nathan and Mary Kindry came to Canada and settled in this area of what is now the city of Mississauga, then part of Trafalgar Township, in the early 1820s. We don't have a specific date. It is possible that they tenanted or rented a property for purchasing outright. In historic terms, the cemetery itself is located on part of Lot 10, Concession 10 of the new survey of Trafalgar Township. This part of what was Trafalgar Township was later amalgamated into what is now the city of Mississauga. Interestingly, the cemetery itself does not appear to be established on land owned by the Kindrys. It was on an adjacent property. Asa Kindry, who is believed to be a son of Nathan and Mary, he purchased 100 acres on Lot 9, Concession 10, which is immediately south of the cemetery property in 1854. So that's the kind of our link. It's believed that the parents were tenants on the property, and a son later purchased a property nearby, but not the property on which the cemetery itself stands. According to records, and these were researched exhaustively by the former cemetery coordinator for the city of Mississauga, Denise Mahoney, the Kindry children are buried in the cemetery died between 1829 and 1839. 3 girls died from tuberculosis, and the causes of other deaths of the children are unknown. Their father, Nathan Kindry, is actually not buried in the cemetery, but is buried nearby at Eden Cemetery, which is at the corner of Dairy Road and Shelter Bay, just a little bit to the east of this cemetery. And it's unknown why the children were buried in one location, but the father in another. And it is possible that when the established consecrated cemetery of Eden Cemetery was created, that Nathan chose to be buried in the churchyard cemetery rather than in this small informal family cemetery. We're not sure, but Nathan is indeed buried there. We do know that Nathan and Mary had at least 12 children, 5 of which survived adulthood and raised their own families in this area, including Asa, who again in 1854 purchased a farm to the south of the cemetery location. Their other 7 children were buried in this small cemetery, and there are believed to be many other burials in the cemetery as well. So this became kind of a communal community cemetery for the surrounding area, likely from families who lived quite nearby. Most of the people buried in this cemetery are unknown. So the cemetery has a rather unique history of being forgotten, in a sense, and it had disappeared. There were very few stones originally. Most likely there were very few stones and very few reminders of the cemetery as the property became overgrown and the farming continued, and the evolution from rural to suburban to the city of Mississauga. It was rediscovered briefly, or at least it was written about by William Perkins Bull at one point, and also in the 1970s there's some reference to it, but then it was kind of forgotten again in a sense, and it was only in the 1990s when renewed interest came to the cemetery, and Ward 9 Councillor Pat Sato was involved with that as well. But there was renewed interest in the cemetery, and ultimately the cemetery was rejuvenated. Some care was given to the surviving fragments of the gravestones. There's a plaque by the Ontario Heritage Trust commemorating the cemetery, and it was reopened in its, as you see it in its current state today, by the city of Mississauga, and it's cared for today by the city of Mississauga. And again, in large thanks to Denise Mahoney and her efforts to make sure the cemetery was not forgotten again. And so yes, indeed, Kindry Cemetery, established circa 1829, a true historic landmark within the city of Mississauga. And a fascinating place to visit, and a quiet little refuge in the midst of a bustling suburban municipality. I encourage you to visit it and to look at the stone fragments and read what's visible of the Kindry family, and think of the hardships of life in this community in its very early years and its very early rural years. And we have these small reminders scattered across our cemetery. Kindry is not alone in those small rural cemeteries. There are many across our city, but Kindry is quite a neat story to explore and to visit today on the landscape. Your other question was, is it haunted? And while I'm not a ghost aficionado, so I cannot really speak to the authenticity of claims around hauntings, but yes, we have had a few stories of haunted happenings, if you will, and they came about largely with the building of residences nearby, immediately to the west, and we got a few calls about hearing bagpipes on the property, and particularly a few of them very early on. This is in the early 2000s. Haven't heard anything recently about it, but in the early 2000s, we had a few calls saying that people could hear Amazing Grace being played, and so quite fitting for a cemetery location, perhaps. And given that there was this early Welsh connection to the Kindrys on the property, it does make you wonder. But again, nothing official, nothing we've heard conclusively one way or another. But I invite you to visit the property and contemplate and think about the stories of the Kindry family, and read the Ontario Heritage Trust plaque there that commemorates this small cemetery, and think about those people that came and helped to shape this landscape in its very, very early transition years into the settler world. So again, Rajiv, thank you for your question. Thank you, Harmon, for your question, and it's always fun to ponder the origins of holidays and perhaps their names as well when it comes to things that we observe regularly on the calendar. Perhaps we lose sight sometimes of, hey, it's a long weekend and let's go get together as best we can in these days of COVID with family and friends, and perhaps have some recreation time. And long weekends tend to blur a little bit into what they mean and how they came to be. And so, very timely question, given that we've just celebrated the August long weekend, or the August Civic Holiday. So it does have an interesting origin to our city, and your question is, around its naming, and you'll probably hear things depending where you are in the province, whether it's called the Civic Holiday or Simcoe Day or other names that are given to it, and it's kind of a neat way to look at how holidays come to be and how names get to be applied. So the first Monday in August is recognized as a civic holiday in Ontario. Throughout a large portion of our province, many municipalities refer to it as Simcoe Day, and that is in honor of Sir John Grave Simcoe, the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, now Ontario. It was officially named Simcoe Day in Toronto only in 1968. So we're not dealing with a long history of the name Simcoe Day, even though Lieutenant Governor John Grave Simcoe was active in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Many municipalities began to follow suit, following Toronto's lead on the official naming of the holiday, but not all. There were many who chose a different path, and some that chose no path at all. But you know, it is a unique holiday on our calendar in terms of its history. Its origins go back to just after Canadian Confederation. 2 years after Confederation, in 1869, the City of Toronto established a midsummer holiday as a formal day of recreation for citizens, as a break from long hours of largely industrial employment. In 1870, and it was a holiday for in its early years. It was at the whim of the council of the day, and so its date moved around. Its position on the calendar moved around in those early summer years. In 1875, the City of Toronto fixed its Civic Holiday as the first Monday in August. So, you know, when we look at celebrating a long weekend in August, that first Monday in August, it does have that Monday, that date in our calendar goes back to at least 1875. Gradually over the years, most municipalities began to follow suit. Not everyone, and this is one of the things important to remember about the Civic Holiday. It remains a municipal holiday, so by each municipality governs its own, if you will. It's not a statutory holiday. And so you have some variation across the province, but for the most part, we're dealing with the first Monday in August. Again, as of 1968, it had been informally referred to as Simcoe Day. In 1968, it becomes the norm to refer to it in Toronto as Simcoe Day, and other other municipalities began to follow suit. Again, though, since it's a municipal holiday, it was up to each municipality and the cities and towns to decide on what to refer to their holiday as, or to what to name it. And so several municipalities began to honor their own local history, specific to their stories on that day. And for example, we're all dealing again with the August long weekend, the first Monday in August. Burlington celebrates Joseph Brant Day. Brantford celebrates its founding fathers with Founders Day. Oshawa, known by many as the home of General Motors, celebrates McLaughlin Day in honor of Colonel McLaughlin, who was instrumental in the foundation of General Motors in Oshawa. Peterborough honors its founder with Peter Robinson Day. The city of Ottawa renamed its civic holiday after Colonel John By, the builder of the Rideau Canal and the founder of Bytown, which was later renamed Ottawa. Sarnia honors Alexander Mackenzie, Canada's second Prime Minister. Cobourg renamed Simcoe Day in honor of James Cockburn, a father of Confederation who represented Cobourg. And finally, in some communities, and that's just a broad survey, there are many other variations therein, but in many municipalities across Ontario, including our own, it's simply known as the Civic Holiday. And so Mississauga is one of those places that has never formally renamed or even named that day, and again refers to it as the Civic Holiday, a day of formal recreation for its citizens. And so that's the long and short of it in terms of the Civic Holiday. It'd be interesting to see, perhaps we can have a poll to suggest what should we call the Civic Holiday if Mississauga were to get a name, or to give it a name. And it would be an interesting conversation to have to see what their citizens might think of calling the August long weekend the first Monday in August. So again, Harmon, thank you for your question, and always fun to ponder the origins of some of the traditions we have here in the city of Mississauga and abroad. So thank you. Thank you for your question on Yon's Trail and who indeed was it named for. Well, thankfully it's one of those ones that we don't have to stretch too far back in time because it's a more recent creation on our city's landscape. The trail, Yon's Trail, was named after Janusz Zurikowski. Janusz was known locally as Jon when he worked here. Janusz was born in Ryazauka, Russia, to Polish parents on September 12th of 1914. and he is best remembered for his association with Aviero Canada and the famed Avro program, for which he was the chief test pilot in its early years. Jan's nickname was actually Zura, Jan Zurakowski, and he was renowned throughout the aviation world for his aeronautical skills and his extensive career as a test pilot, as quite a well-respected test pilot. He was a decorated aviator, having served for Poland and the United Kingdom during the Second World War. In 1952, he immigrated to Canada and began a career as a lead developmental pilot for Aviero Canada, which was headquartered here in historic Mississauga up in Malton. Jan worked in Malton, which is again within Mississauga today, during his time with Aviero and the Avro program. Flying the CF-100, this is the Canuck, the predecessor of the Avro, on December 18th, 1952, Jan broke the sound barrier and became the first person to exceed the speed of sound in a straight-wing jet aircraft. During the 1950s, Jan also flew as an acrobatic display pilot with some quite spectacular results, we're told. In 1958, Jan was chosen as the chief development test pilot for the CF-105 Avro program through Aviero Canada. Jan was at the controls of the Aero's first test flight in RL-201 on March 25th of 1958. Jan retired from test flying later in 1958, and in 1973 he was inducted to the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame for his outstanding achievements to Canadian aviation. Jan died at his home in Barry's Bay, Ontario on February 9th of 2004, a very respected member of the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame, and well regarded for his connections and his interest in making sure the story of the Avro never disappeared. So a fascinating thing. There's lots to read about and lots to explore in Jan Zurakowski. You can find a lot online, but I do encourage you to check out your local library and some of the written materials that are available on the Avro, a story that truly never goes away. And integral to that story is the career of Jan Zurakowski. And as I mentioned, the Jan's Trail in Ward 5 in the city of Mississauga is named in honor of Jan Zurakowski. Thank you for spending some time with us here at Ask a Historian, and I do encourage you each week to send in your questions and anything that you might be interested in or curious about, how something got its name, or what's the story of a house or a road. Send in your questions and let's explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga together. So we'll see you next week on Ask a Historian here at Heritage Mississauga.